Hey there riders, Motojourno Chris here, and I'm having a look at Suzuki's M109R. This is a Boulevard, and this is the Black Edition, which is mainly just because it's been blacked out around the engine. It's not fully blacked out. There are still a couple of features that haven't been, like those indicators. Obviously, it's got this white and blue paint scheme, which looks absolutely amazing. This is a really eye-catching bike, and I gotta say the styling is really exceptional. So many looks are garnered by this machine, you know, everywhere you go. And the thing that really combines with those looks is it's just got that beautiful twin sound to it. Like, it sounds absolutely horn with the standard exhaust on it. It really is this beautiful looking package with this beautiful exhaust note. And I think for a lot of people looking at this kind of bike, that's a big part of the battle. So straight off, styling, really, really good. Build quality, amazing as well, of course, because you know it's a Suzuki, it's what you'd expect. The price for these is 19 on road here in Australia, which for basically a hyper cruiser, which is competing with the Harley FXDR 114 and say Ducati's Diavel, that's an exceptional buy-in price. It's really, really, basically really cheap. It's got really high spec kind of features across it. It's got those 46mm cartridge forks. It's got these big massive rotors on the front, 310mm rotors, four-piston Tokiko, four-piston calipers as well, which are a really nice braking system on the front. The rear's just got a dual piston caliper and a much smaller disc. I think it's a 275mm disc, and the rear braking performance is pretty limited on this machine. It's got a rear monoshock. It's 350-ish kilos on the road, so it is quite heavy. It's a fair bit heavier than the other competition that I mentioned. And I mean, overall, it's kind of the embodiment of that hyper cruiser. And as I said, the price is really, really good, but there are a couple of areas, like there's 160 Newton meters of torque available from 3,200 RPM, which is, it revs right up to 7K. So that's nice and low in the rev range. It's an absolute stonker of an engine. It's beautiful. And when you open that throttle, it is just insane. The only issue is it's quite snappy down low, which means it's a lot of work in traffic. And you know, that's going to be, depending on what kind of riding you're doing, that could be quite a consideration. I've got to do a fair bit of kind of really terrible city riding to get out to the nice roads. And if the traffic's really bad, this is going to be a bit more of a handful than some of the competition. As well as that, it's got this real tendency to hunt when you're just sitting at a steady throttle or just rolling on the throttle a little bit. And it really feels like the fueling on this needs a lot of work, because remove those issues and it would just be, you know, it'd totally transform the bike if you're asking me. Obviously, this kind of bike, you just want to be smashing that throttle open as much as you can and really taking advantage of all of that torque, because there's just bucket loads of it, and it revs straight up through the rev range. It's a beautiful power plant. But like I said, the fueling issue, to me, that should be something that can be easily fixed. I don't think this is a Euro 4 bike. It hasn't got ABS on it. So they're not under the constraints that Euro 4 has, which quite often kind of makes manufacturers compromise the fueling. And I do feel like that could really be improved. Just to, you know, bring it more on par with the competition. The front end, beautiful forks on it, really, really good front end, if you ask me. But obviously with that massive 240 section rear tire, it's really constrained by the fact that it's just such a flat tire. And I felt like I noticed it a little bit more on this bike than on some of the competition. And it does feel like it'd really benefit from a slightly rounder rear tire, just because it requires a lot of muscle to get it turning, particularly if you're running through some nice twisties and you're coming up on corners which are tightening up on themselves. The ground clearance is awesome, which is a really good feature because you can really get it over, but it does require a lot of muscle to get it over. And again, that's the style of the bike, but it's really worth mentioning because I felt like it was a little bit more noticeable on this particular machine than on some of the competition. Ground clearance is awesome. The rear shock, I've got to say, I was not that impressed with. 350 kilos, it really feels like the rear end is not that controlled. Over flat roads, it's beautiful. There are no problems, of course, because they're flat roads, you know. But as soon as you start getting kind of the slightly harsher bumps, like not even really harsh bumps, just once you start getting the inconsistencies in the road and things like that, that rear really starts kicking up a little bit and is not very controlled just overall. And what that was doing is I was getting a lot of compaction on my spine, which, you know, I've been out for an hour, but if you were doing longer rides, that would really build up. And I also haven't got to the really poor parts of the road yet, which would be considerably worse for that kind of issue on the rear of the bike. So that's something to consider as well. I think I mentioned the rear brake's not very powerful, which is a bit unusual because normally on these cruisers, they've got really good rear brakes, which work really well. And I think that really helps around town, particularly, like I said, because it's a little bit snappy at low RPM and in that really horrible traffic. A really powerful rear brake would help because you just use the rear brake as much as you can and that smooths everything out. And I think that would actually help overall. But I mean, it is what it is. It's got that beautiful exhaust on it. Like I said, the sound of this bike is just absolutely horn. It's beautiful. It's got really nice fairing on the front here, or I guess you'd call it a cowl around the light. That offers a little bit of wind protection. I was finding it was directing the wind above my neck, so I was still getting it in the helmet, but I wasn't getting so much of the wind. However, this riding position for me, I'm 70 kilos, 180 centimeters or just under. So I found I was a bit too stretched to the bars, which just made it that little bit uncomfortable as the speeds rose. Obviously, you're getting a lot of wind onto your feet on those forward controls and onto your legs as well, since your legs are out a little bit. And that comes into it. What I also really noticed is even though it was keeping a lot of the wind off my chest, I was getting a lot on my shoulders and my arms, and that becomes tiring quite quickly, especially as the speeds rise. And I mean, obviously there's not significant wind protection on this kind of machine, so that's always going to be, you know, kind of an aspect of it. But again, it was something that did stand out to me. Really simple controls. You don't have an adjustable clutch, however you do get an adjustable brake lever on the other side. It's got those quite thick grips as well, which won't be for everyone. And you've also got these massive risers which pull those bars back to a kind of more comfortable reach. It was still quite a reach for me. You've got this really cool headlight just there, as you can see, with that cowl around it. And you've got your tachometer just hidden away there. For some reason, the speedo is down here on the tank, and that does make it a little bit more difficult to kind of tell your speed at a glance, which isn't ideal. I'd much rather the speedo up the top and the tacho, which, you know, who really cares about that anyway on this kind of bike, being down on the tank. It'd make a little bit more sense. So the overall ride, I've got to say, apart from, you know, requiring a bit of muscle through the tight stuff, and one thing you'll really notice is going around tight roundabouts and kind of in those suburban conditions where you're in really tight little areas, obviously not a strength on this bike, very, very noticeable. But, you know, once you get out into the nice, more sweeping roads, you get to the sweeping twisties and things like that, it's a nice thing to barrel through. It does pick up that power and the torque from nice and low in the rev range. I'm not a fan of the gearbox. It's a very clunky gearbox, which isn't a problem in itself, but it requires a real, you know, smash of the throttle as you're downshifting. I did notice if you don't do that, like if you kind of give it that normal, just a little bit of revs as you're downshifting into first, for instance, it'll pop straight back out of first into neutral. You have to give it a heap of revs, even at speeds which I would have thought it should just shift down pretty naturally. I guess in a way that's a bit of a character of the hyper cruiser, so I can't complain too much about the bike in that aspect of things, but I don't like it popping out of first into neutral. Like I said, it's got really good, it's a really well spec'd machine overall. It looks absolutely horn, and I reckon for 19 grand, that's a really kind of cool buy-in price for this kind of machine. It's a lot lower than a lot of the competition. I'm going to do a comparison video on Harley's FXDR 114 because I've ridden one of those quite recently, and I think there's a really interesting comparison between the two machines, so stay tuned for that. But I mean, obviously it's a mixed bag for me because I think I'm probably a little bit small for the bike, so that kind of affects the ergonomics overall. It's got a beautiful engine in it, but it really does need a little bit of polishing to bring it up on par with the competition. But it's got so much character, it's got so many looks, or such good looks I should say, and it's just got that absolutely beautiful engine tone and exhaust tone to it that I think is on par with the best Ducatis that I've heard. So, I mean, still really, really impressed, but a couple of things that stand out to me is just needing a little bit of improvement. But I think if you're looking at one of these bikes and you jump on board and you're really happy with it, then, you're going to be very, very rewarded for the price point. Anyway, stay safe out there. I'll be back soon, like I said, with that comparison video. Have a great day. Don't forget to sub, hit that notification bell, and I'll be back soon.